Hey, gun people, man, I get so many comments when I talk about the wind chill out here when I'm doing my videos, and I got scarves wrapped around my neck and a hat on, and I'm trying to stay warm, and people are like, wind chill doesn't matter, it's only the temperature. Man, wind chill matters. And I don't know if people understand why it matters or how it matters, but I'm going to try to explain it a little bit. So I did a little research, got some fancy terms down, and hopefully be able to explain this a little more scientifically than, the wind blows, it don't matter. So, in survival, they go the rule of threes. You can do 3 minutes without air, 3 hours without shelter in extreme environments, obviously, and 3 days without water, and 3 weeks without food. So, the rule of threes in survival matters. Now, the one that's going to affect us here is 3 days without shelter. Although water and food will help keep you warm, you can go a long time without them. If you go 3 hours without shelter in extreme conditions, you're probably going to die. And, shelter is an important thing when you get caught out in the wild or you're in a survival situation. So let's define wind chill, how they're defining it. Wind chill is a perceived decrease in air temperature by the body on exposed skin to the flow of air. Wind chill numbers are always lower than the air temperature. And the reason why wind chill is lower is because it's removing heat from the body. So some experts disagree on how the whole cooling thing happened. There was one study to where they wanted to use naked bodies in the wind. Another study to where they say a person walks 3 miles an hour. So if he's walking into the wind, we need to put that in the calculation. Another one wanted to measure it on how high we're going to measure it, because if we've measured at the ground or 5 feet or 20 feet, we're going to get different numbers. So it's not an exact science on what exactly wind chill is, but the theory behind it is fairly simple. This chart here is the most commonly used, and basically it gives the temperature on the top, the wind speed on the side, and then if you draw the correlation between the two, you'll get the wind chill factor. And down here it says 10 minutes for frostbite to occur, and 5 minutes for frostbite to occur. So if you're in this area, frostbite's going to occur. So wind chill matters for frostbite. Wind chill will not freeze something that is not in freezing temperatures. So thermoregulation is a process I talk about on my horse channel about horses trying to stay warm and how they do it. Is basically the body's way of maintaining its core temperature. And our body has to maintain a pretty close temperature, because I think when we get down to like 95 degrees, you start worrying about hypothermia. So that's when real problems start. So a healthy internal temperature is maintained through thermoregulation. And the snow monkeys here maintain their thermoregulation by getting in hot water when it's really cold. At higher, they move down to the valley into the warm water to help regulate their temperature and stay warm. And that's their way, not our way. For humans, to maintain our steady core, it's basically we can produce heat through exercise. We can move heat through the blood, through skin, sweating. The air blows. When you turn on a fan, it feels cooler because it helps remove heat from the body. When you turn on a fan in the winter, it helps remove heat from the body. When you turn on cold wind, it helps remove heat from the body. So the colder the air and the faster it blows, the faster it removes heat from the body, the quicker it lowers your core temperature. So for a little science here, one of the laws of thermodynamics is heat will always flow from an object with higher temperature to an object with lower temperature. Our body in the cold and in freezing temperatures, or when we're out, when wind chill really matters, our body is always warmer than the outside air. So according to laws of thermodynamics, our body heat is always going to go toward the colder temperature around us. And that process goes down to thermal equilibrium. Because the heat will always flow to a cooler object, that flow continues until both objects maintain the same temperature. So when you stick a hot rod into cold water, it steams, it cools, and this heat is flowing to the water. So the water is rising in temperature, and the steel rod is lowering in temperature until they get the same temperature, and that's when you get thermal equilibrium. To me, wind chill is easiest explained with a hot bowl of soup or a hot cup of coffee. As the steam rises it's losing heat. As the cup cools, it's losing heat. So the hot liquid inside is trying to reach thermal equilibrium with the temperature of either the air, if it's colder, the room temperature. If you got your hands around it, it's going to equalize to your hand temperature. So it'll warm your hands up. If you hold a cold drink, it'll cool your hands down. So this right here, this process of the steam leaving is basically to me what wind chill is. If you blow on a cup of coffee or soup, you remove heat quicker. It drops the temperature of the beverage or soup faster, and therefore it's going to be reaching that cooler temperature, until it equalizes. So what happens to the body is we have an air pocket around us that's heat, and as the wind blows that away, it's dropping and it's trying to equalize our temperature with the colder outside temperature. So if your body is a bowl of soup, it has this nice steam and heat coming off of it. We're all exposed body. Obviously, if you wrap this, it'll keep that blanket around you. But on exposed area, the wind blows and it removes that nice warmth, and our body not only feels colder, it actually is losing heat faster. So wind chill matters because it's dropping your temperature faster. Same in this picture. We've got heat around us. As the wind blows in, this side of your face is cold. This side that's not in the wind is maintaining that heat, I guess, shield around you. And I call it a heat shield because when you lose your heat shield, your body temperature drops. When the body overheats or gets too cold, and we used to do this with our dogs in the military, if it was really hot, we would grab buckets of ice, put them in the shade, and throw ice in between their legs so their large blood vessels could take the cold and drop their body temperature so they don't overheat. Well, when your body gets too cold and you go into hypothermia, they do the same thing. They can put warm bottles of water around large blood flow areas, and then they wrap you in a blanket which controls all that heat. It keeps that heat shield around you, and that helps you to stop losing your core temperature and will help raise it. This takes time, and it can't happen real quick or it'll put you in shock. So here's a few cold facts that when you get cold, your nose runs when you get cold because your body's trying to warm the air going to your lungs, and it creates more mucus, and that mucus causes your nose to run because it's trying to warm air. So that's why when you're really cold, your nose runs. Also, you'll shiver because when your muscle contracts, it produces heat. So shivering produces heat. The body will cause your muscles to contract if you're standing still. If you're walking, working, or doing physical activity, you're producing heat. So if you're really working hard and you're shivering, your body's telling you you're not producing enough heat, and that's when you get into problems, get close to hypothermia. The body will always sacrifice toes and fingers and external things like ears, anything that's not necessary, in order to keep the core temperature, mind, brain, spine, heart, lungs, keep those things good below floor, and keep that temperature regulated for those areas. And you have to pee when you're cold because the blood flow is reduced to your extremities, and then you have more blood volume, and therefore your body reads that you have all this extra blood volume, so it wants to reduce fluid by causing you to want to urinate. So the coldest wind chill ever recorded, I guess, was back in 03. Now, they just kind of developed wind chill back in 2000. So it hasn't really been around, and some people think instead of wind chill, they ought to be able to frostbite warning. Instead of saying the wind chill is so-and-so, it should be, if you're out in this temperature for this long, you're going to get frostbite. So that's what some of the scientists are arguing on, whether wind chill is valid or whatever, but it's something to be aware of. It's not absolute. But the coldest one was, I guess, in 2003 in Antarctica, where they 94 degree. Let's see, minus 94 degree day, and they had a 75 mile an hour wind, which produced a wind chill of negative 150. Another simple way to kind of remember it is wind speed affects the rate of evaporation, and evaporation removes heat, and loss of heat lowers body temperature. So the more the wind's blowing and removing heat faster, the quicker you're going to lose body temp. And some people think you can't get hypothermia if the temperature is above freezing, and that's not necessarily true. Remember, you only need to drop your core temperature like 3 degrees for hypothermia to start kicking in. I remember when we used to water ski in this cold Sacramento River, where the river would be coming from the mountains where the snow melt. And we would go out there and want to start water skiing early before it warmed up, and it would be so stinking cold. Some people wore wetsuits. We just put on our shorts and went out there, and it was much warmer when we got out of the water, even being pulled by a boat, than it was if we fell and were in the water and that cold water was just running by our body, removing heat. And even though the water wasn't freezing, it was still very capable of putting us into hypothermia. So the body can lose heat in several ways. Conduction is direct transfer. Obviously, the monkeys were hanging on to a warm rock next to the warm water instead of the ice. If you sit on a cold rock, you're going to get colder. If you're out of the sun, you're not going to be getting radiation heat from the sun. As the wind blows, it's going to evaporate, and then convection as the air moves around your heat and removes it. So, I mean, when people say windshield doesn't matter, I'm just like, man, you've got to get out of the wind, and you've got to protect your body from losing heat. Wearing a hat, wearing that thick scarf around your neck where you have those large blood vessels moving a lot of blood, you're losing temperature. So a scarf around the neck, head, layers of clothing, all those things help. Getting out of the wind, having some sort of wind block, not facing the wind, keeping your any exposed skin from the wind, because as the wind hits your exposed skin, it drops the temperature of your skin. As it drops the temperature of your skin, your body tries to heat that up, removing heat from other areas, which again contributes to lowering the body's core temperature, resulting in hypothermia. So, I mean, now one thing about freezing, windshield will not freeze something if the temperature is not freezing. So windshield, although it doesn't lower the temperature, if the temperature is 35 degrees above freezing, windshield will make it feel like it's below freezing, but it will not freeze water, because through the thermal equilibrium, it's gonna meet the temperature of the air. So if it's 35 out, the coldest it will be, or anything will be 35. Although the windshield will make it appear, and the windshield will help something reach that 35 degree a lot quicker, it will not freeze it. So because the windshield is extremely high and it's only 33 degrees, so it's not 32 freezing, nothing will freeze because of windshield, but it will remove heat much quicker. So if you put two things, one in the wind and one out of the wind, the one in the wind will reach the temperature much quicker, whatever the temperature is, than the thing that's not in the wind, even though they are the same temperature when you put them out there. So it won't, and that's why people a lot of times say, oh, just ignore windshield, it doesn't matter. You know, if you're in your car and your car temperature says it's 35 degrees out and you go 60 miles an hour, the windshield should really drop your temperature a lot lower, but the temperature doesn't change because your car doesn't feel, although it's removing heat quicker, it doesn't feel the loss of heat any quicker. The human body, the windshield affects the human body. And the windshield is more about living things and removing heat quicker, because when the body loses heat very rapidly, it can put it in a shock, and then it'll drop that core temperature. So, granted, windshield will not freeze something unless it's freezing out. You know, they say the old igloos. If you build an igloo, it can only get 32 degrees in there because that's freezing. So you're out of the wind, you're inside an igloo, even though it's a ice house, you're still warmer. If the temperature drops outside to 40 below freezing, theoretically, inside the igloo, out of the wind, the temperature, if it's maintained and not moving, will maintain to 32 degrees Fahrenheit, because it's not affected by the wind or the outside temperature. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better understanding about windshield and how it can affect you. Remember the rule of threes. You got to find shelter if you're out there. Obviously, you can build a fire, get heat, have something to get heat to warm the body, get your wet shoes off. All this changes if the windshield is a certain temperature and you're out there in the rain, or you're out there in a wet, or you fell into a river and now your clothes are damp and now that heat's being removed at a faster, accelerated rate than it was before because of the cold water around your clothes, etc. So for me, windshield matters. A lot of people may say it doesn't. I think it matters for humans, and I think it matters for your critters, your dogs, your animals, horses, etc. Whatever you have, windshield matters. Take it for what it's worth. That's my take on it. You can ignore it or believe that it matters. We'll end that there.